So we established, didn't we, at the end of that last panel, that we have a problem in the West. We spent, in the West, 5 decades and trillions of dollars fighting communism at home and around the world. And certainly in Britain, well, it now sits in number 10 Downing Street. But not only that, the insidious, toxic, carcinogenic metastasization of radical Marxism has taken place in all of our public-facing institutions, in our civil service, in our judiciary, in our police force, across academia, even increasingly in the private sector. And we are seeing the results on a daily basis. Whether it's mental health destroying ideas of self-flagellation, the ideas of decolonization, self-hatred as a race and a civilization, or whether it's inverting truth, switching the moral compass, which leads to the endangerment of a huge subset of society, the censorship, the demonization of anybody who stands up to it. And it is poignant to me that this CPAC is taking place in the wake of the death of my good friend and former colleague, Anne Widdecombe, who we know died for standing up against this stuff, for speaking truth to power. We live in a very dangerous and dark time. What I want to know is, where did this all begin? How is it funded and spread? And what the hell are we going to do about it? So, Joseph, I want to start with you because we have had long conversations between us about a very well-known organization in the United Kingdom. People say that George Orwell's novel 1983 was based upon the foundation of the Fabian Society. Joseph, explain what it is, explain what it does, explain what has taken place over the last century.
Well, yeah, thank you, Alex. And you're right, we've talked about this at length. I think the conversation is starting to seep into the broader public now. We've seen a lot of that, particularly over the last couple of years. This mention of the Fabian Society. Before 1984, there was 1884. And that's an important date to remember. In 1884, a group of left-wing intellectuals, which went on to include Sidney Webb and George Bernard Shaw and other well-known intellectuals, playwrights, and other figures of the time who were broadly on the left, they banded to form something which ostensibly was a think tank, the Fabian Society, and their original logo, as many people are now beginning to realize, was a wolf in sheep's clothing. And if that's not a giveaway, I don't know what is. Over the next 140 years, their project, their mission, their self-stated mission was something called gradualism. They realized that in Britain, a communist revolution would never work because we're far too sensible. We weren't going to take to the streets and overthrow all of our institutions and hierarchies on a whim. And they realized that what they actually needed to do was take over the institutions, the political class, to fight back against what we'd now call traditional conservatism in a way that was both subversive but also long-term and therefore almost unrecognizable. And they created two key things, which you probably all have heard of. One is the Labour Party, and the other is the London School of Economics. They were the founder of those establishments. And what they did during this time period is also to look at what was going on in the continent. And indeed, George Bernard Shaw was famous for saying that Mussolini was the right kind of tyrant. He went to meet with Stalin and said that he had seen all the horrors and he delighted in them. That was his comment on the communist regime. And there was one notable difference about this movement, which was the idea of British exceptionalism. They believed that despite retaining all these communist tendencies, they could also imprint nationalism on that project. And fast forward to today, we don't need to mention all that happened during the 60s, 70s, and 80s, but what we do need to mention is that from Tony Blair onwards, pretty much every senior member of the Labour Party has been a Fabian, including Sadiq Khan, Lord Hermer, Keir Starmer, governors of the Bank of England, various people who have risen to very, very high positions in society. The judge in the Epping Bell migrant hotel case, it was found out was a Fabian.
Andy Burnham.
Andy Burnham, of course, who's contributed pretty much nothing, well, intellectually anyway, to the Fabian Society, but he still has the badge. I would say that, the archetype of this is probably someone like Tony Blair, who appears with a charming expression that everybody can get behind, but ultimately has a far deeper agenda to what's going on. So in a nutshell, that's the Fabian Society. We could talk about this a lot, as Alex and I have done, but I think it gives you a good idea of what we're up against and how those funding systems, those institutions have developed over the space of 140 years.
So we have an idea now of politically this long, slow march towards where we are today, 100 years of a growing communism, a growing extreme socialism in this country. But Charlotte, your research into woke waste has drawn out some utterly breathtaking, heart-stopping discoveries of whose money's being spent where and how on, frankly, astonishing and disturbing projects. Tell us more.
Very true, Alex. It's unfortunate to say that all of us are being charged for absolutely terrible things, from university studies to charities. So at the moment, a study is taking place called the Europe That Gay Porn Built, 1945 to 2000, and it's costing the taxpayer over £840,000. We're also being charged around 1.5 million to decolonise folk music, in a study that will take a look at the unflinching white centricity of folk music. We are also funding another 1.5 million study into LGBTQIA plus BCDEFG asylum policies, and some of this will result in theatre performances and documentaries. And also, to make things worse, the money is being given to a Spanish sociologist. So, you know, you're always told, oh, we want to bring brilliant doctors to the UK, you know, someone's going to save you in the NHS. No, we are funding doctors investigating the gender identity of asylum seekers. And it just goes from there. The left really have a double whammy edge, because it's not just the Fabian deep state stuff and all their tangled webs of funding, but then they've got the double whammy on top of controlling. They literally do control all our institutions. They are the default, getting all our taxpayer money that will all make everyone in this room need a stiff drink afterwards. And yeah, it's just not right.
What is the nexus of this stuff? Is this sort of disseminating out of the civil service, out of our quangos, out of our institutions, and then being sort of wasted by being thrown around on various academic institutions? Or are there foreign influences, perhaps, who want to fund this stuff to further divide our society?
There are absolutely foreign influences, not that they ever get looked at when it's going into left-wing funding. So one is called Pierre Omidyar, and he is one funder. He runs something called Luminate. He's a French-born Iranian-American businessman, and he's funding, along with others such as Unbound Philanthropy, also US, he's funding this thing called Climate Spring, which is trying to create TV shows and is working with Shakespeare's Globe on embedding climate messaging onto ITV and the BBC. So foreign funding is influencing what you watch. And then George Soros, yeah, he's just, I mean, there are a lot of foreign funders about, actually, but Soros, you know, one of the many ways that he gets involved in our democracy is we have something called all-party parliamentary groups, basically like special interest groups, and often they provide a secretariat, and that just basically means someone can go and take notes, but it's often being funded by things like Soros, and he would do it through his Open Society foundations, which then fund something called the Athena Foundation, and that then funds multiple APPGs in Parliament. So he's got the director of the government. Also, a lot of things to do with EU activism linked back to Soros. Best for Britain received around 4 million from George Soros. European movement, which is symbiotic with Best for Britain, around 400,000. And they also have access to Parliament through the APPG for Europe, which makes it sound really neutral. Oh, we're going to sit down and discuss Europe, no, it's an activist group and it leads directly back to Soros. And I'm afraid there's just plenty more where this came from.
It is astonishing to me, both the reach and the complexity, the sophistication now of the cobweb, the insidious cobweb of socialism and Marxism that blights British society. But Bill, you've really dug into this stuff, haven't you, when it comes to what is happening in America and across the wider West?
Yes, so I am a senior editor for the New American Magazine and president of the John Birch Society. And for 60 years plus, we've been trying to alert the people of the United States and the world to the fact that the socialist, communist movement that we see infiltrating all of our society from top to bottom is really a combination of globalists, many of whom are considered the top capitalists. So we have the big foundations, and it's not only George Soros, Rockefeller Foundation, Ford Foundation, MacArthur Foundation, all of these big American foundations, the Weiss Foundation from Switzerland, all of these big capitalists who are usually associated with the World Economic Forum, they are funding and promoting all of this Marxist-Leninism. And when the Fabian socialists talk about socialism, democratic socialism, they are really wolves in sheep's clothing, as Joseph said. In fact, when I got here last night, I was going to go down the road to the London School of Economics, which is, I just saw the recent poll, that's your premier university here in Great Britain. London School of Economics is the leading institution of subversion, not only in your country, but around the world. It was launched by the Fabian socialists, and down there, I'm going to go down tomorrow, hopefully, and get a photo of the Fabian socialist web window, Beatrice and Sidney Webb, commissioned by George Bernard Shaw. And that's the one that shows very openly what they are planning. They are hammering the world and smashing it to bits, remolding it nearer to their heart's desire. That's what they have on there. And they show their emblem, the wolf in sheep's clothing. They're telling us we have to camouflage our Marxism-Leninism, so they constantly emphasize this. Oh no, we're not revolutionary socialists, we're evolutionary. We're going to do it with the people's consent, and we're going to educate people to accept this. Well, they've been doing that for over a century now. In 1984, it was a century already. So, we're up on a century and a half now. And they've permeated, this is their term, permeation and penetration of all society. They've done that from finance to economics to all of the education establishment. And they are doing it with your money, my money, all the taxpayers' money directly, but a large amount of it is coming from these tax-exempt foundations. They have planned their new world order, which is going to completely eradicate Christianity and all of the benefits that we have had in our free societies. So it was not surprising that all of the Fabians who played such an important role in all this were atheists, and even those that were involved in churches, they were involved in churches so that they could subvert them and create and convince Christians that socialism is a Christian ideal. So I have been, in my early days, in the 1970s and early 80s, I went undercover in the Communist Party USA, the Socialist Workers' Party, various Trotskyite communist workers, communist parties, and the PLO and other Middle Eastern terrorist groups. I can tell you, this goes back a long way, this infiltration and permeation of our societies by the Marxist-Leninists, by the Islamists, and by the globalists. And we have to be willing to call them out. And many people are afraid to do that, because when you do that, you're called a conspiracy theorist, or you're called a racist, a homophobe, a misogynist. So remember the Hans Christian Andersen story we all learned as children about the emperor's new clothes. And everyone was afraid to tell the emperor that he was naked. One little boy did it, and that broke the spell, and everyone was ready to recognize that and call it out. That's what we have to do. You have to be willing to seek the truth, speak the truth, and take a stand. And that's what each of us are called to do.
One thing that has struck me during the course of this conversation is quite what we're up against. 100 years worth of spread, of contamination, of rot, some of the most powerful big business people on earth. We've got all the way to the tops of heads of government, a load of our institutions. We can't just talk about this. We need to act upon this. And unfortunately, it's not really in our instinct as right-wingers to want to censor, to want to ban, to want to cancel. Joseph, politically, I feel like we've reached the 11th hour, that we have to do something now. And yet my big concern is they have got so deep into the system that they're even going to try and do everything they can to stop us having any sort of democratic outcome. What can we do?
Well, I think this conference is all about doing and not just thinking. That's one of the main calling points to what we've built here with CPAC and what we're going to continue to build over the years to come. But I think there are other things that we can do. One is to focus on the way currency works and to understand that to create alternative systems, you actually need to understand economic models and how to build prosperous links. I think that's what the centre-right and the conservative movement globally has often failed to do, which is beginning to change. If you look at projects, particularly in South America, where there's been centre-right governments now for a few years, in parts of Eastern Europe, where they're beginning to adopt things that naturally speak more to a conservative viewpoint, like, for instance, Bitcoin, new ways of transferring peer-to-peer electronic cash, other simple things like education, founding new institutions, where you can train the diplomats of the future, where you can train the civil servants of the future, creating entire parallel systems to what the left has built, and stopping this pretense, really, of trying to counter what they've done from within. Because what you find, and this is not a criticism that's party political in particular, but it's something that needs to be said, which is, since the Conservatives got back into power around sort of 2010 to 12 in this country specifically, what they inherited was an absolute New Labour mess. And the way they tried to counter it is to use the same tools that have been left for them in the toolbox and try to unpick all of that mess, and it didn't work. And the reason for that is because what Fabians and more broadly perhaps people who adhere to the Frankfurt School globally or other communist forms of non-revolutionary thought, what they do very well is to come in and change central systems, whether that is a Supreme Court, a central bank, whether that is the way an entire civil service works or an entire diplomatic corps. And they leave it so heavily legislated, regulated, and filled up with junk that it's very difficult to do anything in that system. And the only way to undo that is to create an entirely new one. And that's exactly what happened, particularly in Argentina. Probably not the best days to talk about Argentina because we just lost to them in the football. But they are doing some very good things under Milei. And one of those was to come in and, of course, afuera, cut.
The infamous chainsaw.
The infamous chainsaw, to cut all the civil service departments that simply didn't need to be there. And lo and behold, the emperor had no clothes, and the economy recovered with less bureaucrats. Who can believe that? But this is something that we can take and replicate globally. And one of the things we're looking at the Centre for Economic and Social Reform, which is another thing that I'm involved in, is looking at best-in-class commercial solutions that can be applied to government. That's something maybe you want to come in there, Alex.
Charlotte, when it comes to the public sector, you've been so astonishingly brilliant, tenacious at following the money, but is cauterizing those funding channels going to be enough? Or do we have to get real if we ended up, thankfully, with the right-wing government of the future? Let's see. I don't trust them to not mess with the plebiscite before the next election. But if we were to end up with a right-wing government, do we need to be looking at actually doing what isn't instinctive to us, but banning things, potentially banning critical race theory?
I think mostly, the way that woke really exists, because people have spent a lot of time fighting woke, but it's kept in existence by money. So you do need to defund it. And I think basically what the government is going to need is a big set of lawyers, because actually cutting off charity funding and things like that is a complete nightmare. I believe Kemi Badenoch was sued by Kneecap, you know, the awful band, when she came for their taxpayer funding. So you're going to need that. Ultimately, it might take things as well like cleaning up the register of interest. It's really difficult actually to define when things start to be interference. I mean, if it was up to me, I'd say, let's get rid of MPs having shares, you know, but how many people are going to stand if you cut their shares? But what if you put up the pay, things like that? But it's opening us up to a lot of interference. But I think ultimately to say something positive about it, or the amount of citizen journalism I've seen at the moment, people trying to expose all these funding streams going on at the moment, is just, it's never been as good. You know, I'm messaged so often by people really having a go, but we need to get these people into government rather than sort of union experienced idiots.
Good word. I mean, Bill, this is the thing. We've been discussing, haven't we, how convoluted, how complex, how established this is. And it's going to take a whole new generation of politicians, of leaders. It's going to take flooding the zone with radical policy, but also going to take things like a huge repeal act to flush out many of these institutions, many of the things in our statutes books that, quite frankly, are dangerous and toxic. It's not going to be done in a generation, is it?
It's going to, well, as Joseph referred to Millet, it can happen much more quickly than people expect. But we have to recognize this is a very heavy load that we have to move, because we have allowed this to accumulate over a century. And they have placed their people in so many positions of power. So in the 1950s, 1953, the United States House of Representatives held hearings called the Reese Committee hearings on the tax-exempt foundations, because this is going clear back, 75 years ago. It was apparent at that time that the Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, Carnegie, and a number of others were funding subversive, communist, socialist organizations that were undermining our country and our national security. Those hearings got torpedoed by the mainstream media, which was all controlled, and by the politicians who were sold politicians. And what we didn't have then and what we have now is an alternative media, and we have the history and we have the receipts. And I'm very encouraged by what I see here at CPAC Great Britain, because frankly, a lot of Americans over the last 50 years, as I've been reporting on this, a lot of Americans said, oh, Europe's gone, England's gone, we just have to go it alone. And I and a number of others said, no, it's not over till it's over. There are people there that will wake up. There are people there who are trying. And that's what we have to do. We have to, I don't know here in England what would be the exact way forward, but right now in Congress, Senator Grassley and a number of members of the House are getting hearings again going to, this time, expose, to get the public support behind legislation and prosecutions of those who are traitors. Literally, we have, you asked about foreign funding. We have the Chinese Communist Party funding organizations in the United States that are Marxist-Leninists. They may be eco-Leninists or homo-Leninists or ethno-Leninists, but they are not just fuzzy-haired, fuzzy-headed socialists. They're Marxist-Leninists. They want to destroy our countries. They hate the West, and so many of them are involved in absolute criminal activity and treason. And we have to have the willpower, the spine, to call it what it is and to treat it as what it is. So it first begins with exposure, letting the public know what is really happening, who is calling the tune, who is paying the piper, and then we go after them. There are legal ways of doing that, and both prosecutorial and legal, fining them, taking away their tax-exempt foundations. All of these foundations that have been engaged in this for a century, they should lose completely their tax-exempt status. When they get tax-exempt status, that means you and I have to pay more taxes.
Well, can I just say, ladies and gentlemen, what a fantastic panel. It's been a privilege to host people who are spending and dedicating their lives fighting this rot on a daily basis. So a big round of applause, and thank you to Bill, to Joseph, and to Charlotte.
Can I do some shameless? New American Magazine. We have copies out here, and you're welcome to copies of this. And this is a book I mentioned, Fabian Freeway. This came out in 1966, and it's just been reprinted, and you can pick up your copy in there. Thank you.
Amazing, thank you. Do make sure to go and get it. I hear especially the book is fantastic. Thank you ever so much.